turn it over to you. This is Peter O'Rourke, Executive Director of MAPSIG Foundation. Today's August 26, 2014, and today we're doing a virtual training session on the Coastal Storm Standard Operating Guidance document that we have recently published on our website. Today's trainer will be Bruce Oswald. Bruce, without further ado, we'd like to turn over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Peter. Can you hear me all right at this point?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right, well, welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. And as Peter said, we're going to be talking about our latest standard operating guidance document that was put out by NATSIG and is available as of, I guess, the end of last week on their website. We'll show you where that is and everything. And I was very privileged to be able to work with this great work group over the course of the last several months, and very excited about what we were able to put together. Now, if my document will just move forward. One of the things that the NATSIG has done, and it has a tremendous number of offerings, and this is not a sales job. I'm just trying to point out the kinds of things that are out there that you might want to take advantage of. As you can see, they come up here. But the area we're focusing in on today deals with the standard operating guidance documents. Now, a few years ago, they produced their standard operating guidance document for the EOC, for the Multi-Agency Coordination Center, and that provides the template, the overall guidance that we use, and these more specific guidance documents that are put together. Last year, we produced one that was very interesting on coastal oil spills, on wildfires, and this year, we're doing the one on coastal storms. This is all part of a partnership between NATSIG, NISGIC, which is the National States Geographic Information Council, and the Department of Homeland Security's Geospatial Management Office. The working group is from the private sector, whether it be not-for-profit or for-profit, and local, state, and federal officials. The scope of work that we dealt with on this project was for the continental United States, the East Coast, the Gulf Coast, the West Coast, and the Great Lakes region as well. And we dealt with not only summer storms that I'm from the East Coast that I'm more familiar with, but also winter storms. So why do we do these kind of things? Well, it's a great deal of this revolves around improving communication and collaboration between the GIS community and the emergency management community. The first time I originally came, my GIS experience is coordinating GIS activities in New York State. And the first time I was involved in dealing with emergency managers and GIS personnel, what I got was two different groups that were talking in two different languages. One, the emergency management personnel kept talking about ICS this, ICS that, and the GIS personnel kept talking about ARC this, ARC that, and they were talking kind of at each other, but they weren't really communicating well. And I know that's improved as time has gone on, but you know, this is really to encourage, and we need to do still a lot more in that area. And this SOG is to be considered a template, something to get you started, but also a best practices. And the expertise that was on this working group provided a lot of really neat things. I learned a tremendous amount while I was involved with these wonderful people. And, you know, and so if you've got a standard operating procedure that you used for coastal storm, great, but look through the document. There's other things in here that you may not have thought of, and you can garner from that, and just use those and add those in there. And then the last part of this is really the idea that we need to institutionalize geospatial assets within the Emergency Operations Center. In New York, we were successful in GIS and emergency management several times, and several times we had to recreate the wheel. It needs to get institutionalized. It needs to be in the emergency, the standard operating procedures of the emergency managers. And that's the kind of thing we're trying to stress here. So our work group was about 23 people, and it's unique. I mean, everybody contributes. Peter talked about the amount of effort, and we appreciate those kind of efforts that people put forward on this, but we really try and get it down to be as efficient as possible for the working group members, so that we're gathering their expertise, their experiences, the examples they may have, the links they may have to take us for things in a document, and to do the grunt work ourselves and use them to guide us and to ensure that we're moving correctly to give them the best document possible based on their experiences. So in the members of the work group, I'll just mention, I mean, we've got people from FEMA, from DHS, from NISJIC, Richard Butkerwright is an expert in coastal storms from Florida, Brian Crumpler from Virginia, Tony Foisey is with CSX Railroad. He used to be a meteorologist before he was a GIS professional, and that was an interesting combination here. Sandy Gruber from the city of Lincoln City in Oregon, Jim McConnell, assistant commissioner from New York City, and obviously just gotten through dealing with Sandy a couple of years ago. Chris Meyer from Virginia Beach. A big assist on this goes out to Jim Mitchell from Louisiana Department of Transportation. Robert Moore was from the American Modern Insurance Company. That was a totally different perspective. A good friend of mine, Dale Morris from Erie County, New York, who deals with the Great Lakes storms. Peter Noy from the Coast Guard. Chris Rogers from Kirkland, Washington Fire Department. Farouk Roman from the Niagara region in Canada. Yes, we did have somebody from Canada involved in this. And Sandy Stroud from the Virginia Beach area works for Michael Baker. So a number of different types of people, different types of roles, and all different types of experience really added to the vitality of the group. So our project goals are basically to put together a document that focuses on state and local needs. Other documents have been put together for federal needs and other areas, but this is state and local needs. And it has a couple of purposes I mentioned, but if you're just starting out, we hope that this can help you get up to speed much more quickly than you would just starting from scratch. And we hope that it helps emergency managers understand what they can gain from GIS if they use it, and how it can make their jobs easier and their decision-making better. And then as part of this, we want to make sure that we're consistent not only with the NAPSG SOG, but also with the Department of Homeland Security's geospatial concept of operations. The process is really a unique one. I like it quite a bit. NAPSG has so many contacts across the country. They suggest a core group of people working on a work group, and we go out and I do, as the people are identified, the great part for me is I do individual interviews with them. I find out what their experience is, where their expertise is, and through a series of questions, and as we get all that information together, we're able to develop an outline, which we publish to the group. They provide comments, and we have an initial work group meeting and discuss where we should be going with the SOG and the things we need to make sure we hit. And then I sit down and go through and do the first draft. The draft goes out to the group. Once again, they comment and edit it. We have a meeting, we review all that, and then we go through a couple of iterations of that. And that really seems to be a great formula in which, we can get the expertise from the people without overly burdening them with their regular jobs in place. So that takes place over the course of the winter. In the beginning of the summer, Peter gets the final draft, and he gets it off to the Department of Homeland Security. They do a review, we get their comments, we respond to their comments and edits and redo the document, and what you see is the result of that entire process, and it's been posted to the website. And now it's incumbent on all of us to get this out to people, not only in the GIS community, but the emergency management community that could use this as a useful document. As part of the learning experience, now I got to tell you, my background is not only working in New York State on GIS coordination, but I grew up on an island in the southern New England area. So the first coastal storm I remember was one big hurricane that hit us in like 1958. But it's amazing the amount of storms that have hit both the Gulf Coast and the East Coast, and I think everybody has their storm they may remember the most, whether it be a Katrina, an Andrew, or Superstorm Sandy. It all has happened, whether it's the East Coast, the West Coast, or even the Great Lakes. And these storms are significant. Over half the nation's economic productivity occurs in these areas. Think of all the ports we have, the trains that go, and the major highways that go, produce and carry stuff out of there. One of the things, most of the densely populated areas on the coast are within 10 feet of mean sea level. So if you have a Category 4 or 5 storm that's hitting an area, I mean, it can have a tremendous impact on not only the population per se, but the infrastructure and longer term, the economy of an area. So today we're going to talk about what's in the SOG, what is an SOG, who are we intending this for, key points, a number of different examples of things that we've added in here to make this one different, and then how do you get it? And then let's get started. So a standard operating guidance document, well, standard is kind of a little bit of a misnomer, because when I think of standards, I think of hard standards that have been put out there for various things, for GIS and other arenas. But it's a template, it's a set of guidelines, it's ideas that you might use to develop your own SOG. And the idea here is to take it. If you're starting from scratch, you can look at it and use it as the gospel. But more likely, you've done some of this stuff, and you can take it and take the ideas, cherry pick those ideas that those experts have thrown in there. Maybe if you want to suggest more to NAPSIG, we'll certainly take it and modify the document and put that in there. But modify it to meet your needs or add it to your own SOG, and then use it as effectively as possible. The two audiences, and as I talked about earlier, it doesn't make a damn difference if the GIS professionals get it. The emergency managers have to get it too. And what they need to understand very simply is what's in it for them. How can it make their decision making better, and what can it do to improve the way they respond to these situations? I always think that the GIS professionals are having the tougher part of the job. The emergency managers don't need to know how GIS works. Yes, it would be great if they all did. They just need to know what they're going to get from it and how they should be using it. The GIS professionals, to be effective, really need to know a little bit about emergency management, the terms, the way the overall workflow goes, and then there's that pressure that occurs in the EOC when an event happens. And then they need to know what they're going to have to do to be successful. So those are the two audiences. The first part of the SOG talks about what's the emergency managers and first responders need to know. Yes, what is GIS? And that's important to get a basic understanding of it, but even more important is the kind of questions it can answer for them. And if they get really excited about that and start asking you as GIS professionals where that can go, then you really need to be able to cut and dry, tell them the kind of resources they need. Do they just need to buy a computer? Do they just need to buy a piece of software? Whoa, what's this data or these models? And then, oh, you need to have people run this stuff too. so that they can have a clear picture of what's expected. One of the nice things that NAPSG put together a while ago was a quick guide for GIS implementation in an EOC, and that's available on the website too for a quick download. And if the emergency management people happen to be a little bit more tech savvy, you might refer them to FEMA's Emergency Management Institute online training for GIS. They don't have to spend a lot of time there, but it'll give them an idea of what's involved. And then, so what do they need to be successful? Well, this sounds a little trite, but yes, they have to have a GIS team. And then they have to have them trained, whether it's an incident command system or NIMS or anything else. They need to have an idea of how the EOC is going to function, and then how they're going to have to interact with the people there and what they're expecting to produce. What we ask them to do is it's not enough to just come up and put all this stuff in place. You really have to sit down with the GIS team, explain the issues that you encounter in a coastal storm, and they may be different from region to region. And then actively participate and learn what GIS can do and explain what the timing needs are for this within a shift or within a time frame of when a coastal storm is happening. Most important, it must be integrated into their workflow, and then everybody needs to train not only the GIS team, but the emergency management team on how to use this during scenario-based exercises. So the majority of the document, obviously, is focused on GIS professionals. They need to understand the various systems that are out there, whether it's the NIMS or the National Incident Management System or ICS or the DHS Geospatial Concept of Operations. They need to know how the Emergency Operations Center work, get that all in their understanding of the environment, and also hopefully through training scenarios begin to understand the pressure that comes in working in an emergency operations center. We point out their needs for additional resources may be happening depending on the level of government that they're working off of. There's state GIS coordinators that NISJIC has out there that they can refer to for assistance. There's something called the Emergency Management Compact, which is that contract between states that allows states to request other resources on predetermined rates. They have to pay for these, yes. But for instance, if a storm were to hit Virginia or about to hit Virginia and miss Florida, they might ask for Richard Buckwright in Florida to be made available to come out and help them. So there's that in place. The International Charter, which provides satellite imagery from various satellites that are owned by various countries in major disasters. That's available too, working through the United States Geological Survey. And then we talked about need to know the emergency management terms. If they're going to be successful, it's a constant sales job. And I would wish this not be the case, but my experience is that from the beginning to the end, you have to, not overtly, but you need to work to sell the concepts, where things might be improved, where GIS might be of assistance, recognize where it wouldn't be necessarily good, but then establish a credibility and the ability to deliver on time. And then as we've teed this whole thing up with the emergency managers, the other part of the equation is that the GIS team needs to learn to meet with emergency managers and learn their needs, figure out what problems can best be solved with GIS, reach an agreement on GIS products that they might produce, and start small. I'd suggest to work your way up into timing. When's this going to happen? During the day or during a shift or prior or during an event. Determine what data is needed based on that and or models, and then create as much stuff as you can up front whether it be put your base maps together, have templates, standard forms. Standard forms could be for gathering event data out in the field, or it could just be a standard form for requesting an ad hoc product. But get it standardized and get it out there so people can understand what they need and what's coming and what they can expect to rely on. And then establish a schedule for delivery. Standardized products were really stressed by the group. A delivery schedule was stressed, and a number of other things that I'll talk about as well. There's a lot of different ways to get this implemented, and hopefully this will all work out very naturally after meeting with the emergency managers and getting it integrated in the workflow. But other things that have happened along the way that we've had experience with is, take advantage of people. There's daily briefings in front of the whole floor on the EOC. Maybe suggest to people places where maps might be maybe important to get their points across. And then as people see that, they're probably going to request more things from different areas. And then use your scenarios to test out what you're doing, and then modify it as need be. One of the key things that was suggested, and not only establish a schedule for delivering standardized products as well as ad hoc products, do a reporting mechanism. It can be simple as a spreadsheet, but you need to be able to, or it can be a lot more complicated or sophisticated. The important thing is your team on the GIS end needs to know what's due when, and they need to deliver it then. And then the people using it need to know when that product's coming out the other end. If it's a standardized product, that's going to be on time. But if they've had an ad hoc request, when that's coming out approximately, so they can plan on the best time and way to use it. Another idea that came out very strongly, best practice, I guess would be the best way to put it, was to, as much as possible, save the products going out in like a PDF and make sure there's a date and a time put together with that, so that people can understand later on when they go back, whether it's to get federal funding for something or to analyze what went right and what went wrong through the whole process. They can understand what was happening when, because people are working long hours. It's tough to remember what happened at what points, and this becomes a great help in that regard. So what else is in there? Well, we have a checklist. The checklist can help you prepare for an event, and we're talking prepare in terms of months out. It's very comprehensive. You won't need everything in there, but the idea is there's a bunch of different examples. Pick what you think will matter most, and use that as part of your ultimate checklist. Richard Buckerite shared with us what he called his standing orders. So he has certain things that he's going to do, knowing, it's unique. Coastal storms are pretty unique. You can see them coming. It's not like a tornado or an earthquake where maybe you can't tell that it's coming. You know something's coming generally, and you can put out and post the kinds of products that are going to go out in what time frame. The emergency management community can know what's supposed to be expected, and if somebody else is coming into the EOC on the GIS side, they'll know what's supposed to be done, when it's supposed to be done, and take this, refine it, change it to meet your needs. But the idea is better communication between the emergency managers and the GIS professionals, so everybody knows what's going on. There's a number of data suggestions here. Once again, cherry pick them based on where you're located and what can help you. For instance, within the wintertime area, I know we have stuff, and for the Great Lakes community, that won't be relevant to Florida necessarily, but there are a number of things that work across the board for people, and it's in there. Take advantage of it. Staffing functions. Now, this is a very elaborate area of the SOG, and it was developed originally for the overall SOG that we use for multi-agency coordination centers. There's approximately 11 different positions in there, a number of roles and responsibilities outlined. Experience with the group is Typically, a shift will have between 1 and 5 GIS people involved in it. The most I've ever had on a team was 20. I know New York City's had approximately that many in some of their functions. But you don't need all this. Typically, you won't be able to use it, but you can combine these things. You can learn the kind of things that are potentially possible out there. And I added, for instance, in this one, a category called the geospatial liaison, where the team leaders would be necessarily in the formal meetings in the EOC. This person is more of an informal person. It worked really good for a lot of our activities in New York, and they'd sit with people on the floor of the EOC and talk about what they're doing and where GIS might help them, or sit in committees or task force or work groups as they have meetings and do the same kind of thing. And the other part of this was they provide intel to the GIS team to let them know what was happening on the floor. A big part of emergencies, coastal storm emergencies, is storm models. So we try to identify those models that are out there, what the best uses of those models are, and where you can get them. This will all be changing in the course of the next year or so as NOAA changes how they're going to present this material, but for right now, this is probably a great reference source. Tony Foisty from CSX, as I said, he was prior to being a GIS professional, he was a meteorologist, and that's where his training was. And one of his thoughts were in one of our meetings was that, hey, you know, GIS professionals that I know are great. They do wonderful things with GIS. They don't necessarily know a lot about weather other than what they see. And so maybe we ought to provide them with some capabilities so that our reference areas that they can go. So in our appendices here, we've added in weather definitions so people can understand a more precise definition of what they're dealing with. Event data. One of the things the group stressed was establishing protocols. And ideally, what came out of that was, hey, if you had a methodology that was in place that allowed people in the field to automatically import and allow you to display things that were happening, being reported from the field, that would be like the best possible scenario. And then you may have ability for people to go online and input stuff more manually, and then we need to have protocols also when you don't have technology. How are you going to get the data in paper forms, more or less? And then maybe how are you going to verify the data? Do you have a method for doing that? Is that practical if it is? And then the last part was fully engaging social media, and we saw a lot of that during Superstorm Sandy, and others have picked up on that as we've gone along, whether it be Twitter, Facebook, or other areas. Richard Buckwright.
Yeah, Bruce, it's Peter. I just want to highlight on that social media section. We did do, last summer, NAPSG did 2 virtual training sessions on GIS and social media. If you go back and look at our website under resources, you'll be able to find those. And so those 2 separate training sessions and resources that we posted really can augment what's in this SOG on the social media side. So I would encourage you to take a look at that.
Excellent, excellent, yes. One of the things that Richard Buckwright made very clear to us, as well as others, was he sits in as the GIS lead for Florida on their emergency management calls, and those calls could be between FEMA and the state and or county and local governments. And he doesn't do a tremendous amount, or at least that's the way he said it, but he takes the information from those and he has his own GIS calls. And the calls are with county and local governments to relay what's happening out there and also to find out what their needs are during the course of an event. And he said that's extremely valuable and that really helps out in all levels. We also have a piece in the document here on shift transition, what you need to do to get the next shift up to speed. And then A key part to that, if you have a reporting device or spreadsheet on where you are and things, it makes it a whole lot easier to explain to the incoming team what's in the hopper, what needs to go out when, and other things that have occurred. And so that's all as part of that, as well as we have ideas on other products that are out there, programs, and a pretty good glossary of the emergency management terms. The SOG, we emphasize training. The working group said within the incident command system that we need suggesting the 100 level training, 200 level training, and 700 level training, as well as that FEMA online training from the Emergency Management Institute. Obviously, you need to be up to date on the current software, but you also need to be up to date on the data, where it is, and the models that you're going to use. Exercises can't be stressed enough. It's suggested you start out with the GIS team, have people, if you have a standard set of products you're going to produce in a shift, just go through that. Learn the roles of the people on the team, ensure you have the proper access to data and models, and develop the ability to deliver the products on time. That can't be stressed enough. If people don't have the, I think we failed more than we won in New York State, because, but we had a great team, but it just, stuff needs to be delivered prior to the meetings so people can look at it and get and respond and use it in their decision-making process. Once you get that up to speed with the GIS team, then it's incumbent on the emergency management to engage that team in the exercises, GIS ingest, and make sure that the standardized products are not only delivered on time, but that the emergency management folks use it in their decision-making process. And then, of course, after each scenario, identify what went well, where you need to refine things, and who's going to do it. So as Peter said, for the events coming up, there's no cost. Well, there's no cost for the SOG. It's free. It's available for immediate download at that site. If you want to go to the NAPSG Foundation website, you can get it under resources. And all we ask is that when you're doing this, as you use it, if you come up with new ideas or better directions or insights, let us know, and we'll put that in there and share that with others as well. So it's up to you. Let's get started today. Talk with your people in your Emergency Operations Center. If you need to conduct a self-assessment, we talked about what's in the SOG. NAPSG also has a capabilities and readiness assessment tool that's available online, and then develop a plan to integrate your GIS into the emergency management workflow and ultimately their standard operating procedures. Take a look closely at the document and then start creating your own SOP. You need to look and make sure you know where the data is. The best data is local data, and then get to work on those templates and everything else you can need to be up to speed. And then lastly, exercise, educate, train the emergency managers, and make sure, and the GIS responders, to make sure everybody knows what's in the new SOG and is involved in making it happen. So that's it. I want to thank everybody, and I can open up to any other questions that are available.
Thank you, Bruce. We've actually had several questions asked during the course of the presentation, and I answered them mostly by chat. I can go over some of them, but for the most part, there are more logistical questions about where to find things. You've identified that already for folks, so I'm now showing my screen, and it should clearly demonstrate where the resources section is on the NAPSG website. And if you access the NAPSG Coastal Storm SOG right on the top of the resources section, you'll see that. We do also have other resources that are available, including the previous SOGs, which we would encourage you to take a look at as well and see if it fits within your particular scope. But the material that we put out, we know that we have a very good team of folks, as I mentioned, who volunteer and put together that information. But we also are very well aware that the SOG and all the great people we have are not the be-all, end-all with all the information. So we do count on folks like yourselves to provide us with input to see what we missed, what we got right, what we got wrong, where we can improve. So we very hopeful that when you utilize this, as has happened in the past, let us know your experiences and tell us how we can improve the document. Lastly, I just want to highlight. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bruce.
Well, I was just going to say, and maybe you just want to point out how they can do that through the contact us, or.
Yeah, the best way to do that is to provide direct feedback to me and/or Bruce. That would be certainly the best way to provide that input. This particular training session, as I mentioned, will be available for download online relatively soon. It will be also under the resources section, and I will also include the PowerPoint from today, so you can have this as the PowerPoint as a guide to the SOG. So you'll be able to access both of those hopefully by tomorrow morning. The only other thing I wanted to highlight is that, as I mentioned earlier in the day, if you look under the NAPSG website under events, there are 3 events coming up, 2 in particular that are happening in September. One is a Southeast Regional Summit in Charleston, South Carolina. The other is a Los Angeles Regional Summit, 13th and 14th of September for the Southeast in Charleston, and the 15th in Los Angeles. We'd encourage you all to participate in those events. There's no cost to participate. There are going to be a lot of hands-on training and a lot of really good presentations, so we'd look forward to having you attend. Bruce, I don't have anything else. Anything else that you would like us to cover?
No, this was great, and I think thank you for allowing me to do the presentation, and I want to thank all the people in the work group for their great input, and really appreciate having the opportunity to work with each of them.
Great, many thanks. And as